The night was unusually cold for early autumn. Winds whispered through the dense pine forests of the Pacific Northwest, carrying an eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air like a thick blanket. Mark Wilson, a seasoned forest ranger with 15 years of wilderness experience, sat in his small wooden watchtower, sipping lukewarm coffee and scanning the darkened landscape. At 42, Mark knew every inch of this remote wilderness like the back of his hand. His weathered face, tanned from years of outdoor work, reflected a calm alertness that came from countless nights of solitary watch. The watchtower, perched high above the forest floor, offered a panoramic view of miles of untouched wilderness, a landscape of deep green and shadowy darkness. Suddenly, a brilliant streak of light cut through the night sky. Mark's trained eyes caught the movement immediately. It wasn't like any meteor or shooting star he had ever seen. The object moved with an unnatural trajectory, wobbling and spinning, leaving a trail of sparking energy that illuminated the forest canopy. "That's not normal," he muttered to himself, grabbing his high-powered binoculars. The object was massive, easily the size of a large commercial airplane, but with a shape that defied conventional understanding. Its metallic surface gleamed with an iridescent quality that seemed to shimmer between silver and deep blue. As it descended, Mark could see it was losing altitude rapidly, trailing smoke and what appeared to be fragments of some unknown material. With professional precision, Mark reached for his radio. "Base, this is Wilson. I've got an unidentified object coming down in Sector 7. Requesting emergency response coordinates and backup." The radio crackled with static. No response. The object was now plummeting toward a small clearing about 3 miles from the watchtower. Mark could hear the sound now, a high-pitched whine mixed with a deep, thunderous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Without hesitation, Mark grabbed his emergency kit, a well-worn backpack containing first aid supplies, emergency communication equipment, survival gear, and his service rifle. Years of training had taught him to be prepared for anything. The crash, when it came, was both violent and surprisingly quiet. Trees bent and snapped like matchsticks. A massive cloud of dust and debris erupted from the impact zone, creating a temporary fog that obscured everything. The forest fell silent, as if holding its breath. Mark moved quickly but carefully. He knew crash sites could be dangerous. Fuel leaks, potential explosions, unstable terrain. His years of wilderness rescue training kicked in automatically. He checked his GPS, confirmed his location, and began a methodical approach to the crash site. As he drew closer, the scale of the object became more apparent. It was definitely not from Earth. The metal, if it could be called metal, seemed to pulse with an inner light, changing colors subtly as Mark approached. Fragments of the craft were scattered across a quarter-mile radius, creating a landscape that looked more like an alien terrain than a forest floor. Something was moving inside the main body of the crashed vessel. Mark could see occasional flashes of light, hear muffled sounds that didn't resemble any mechanical or human noise he had ever encountered. His hand instinctively checked the rifle slung across his back. Not that he believed a standard-issue Forest Service weapon would do much against whatever technology had created this craft. "Hello," he called out, maintaining a safe distance. "Is anyone hurt?" No human response would come, but something was definitely alive inside that craft, something that would change everything Mark understood about the universe. The first contact was about to begin. Mark approached the crashed spacecraft with calculated caution. Years of wilderness training had taught him that the most dangerous moments often came immediately after an unexpected event. The vessel lay partially embedded in the forest floor, its metallic skin flickering with strange, pulsating lights that seemed to breathe with an almost organic rhythm. As he drew closer, Mark noticed the craft was not a uniform shape. It looked more like a living structure than a machine. Curved surfaces that seemed to ripple and shift, creating optical illusions that made his eyes strain. Steam, or something that looked like steam, hissed from multiple fracture points along the vessel's exterior. His first aid kit hung heavily on his shoulder. Mark knew he was potentially walking into a situation far beyond any rescue scenario he had ever trained for. But something inside him, a deep-seated sense of responsibility that defined his years as a forest ranger, pushed him forward. A loud, strangled sound emerged from inside the craft. It wasn't human. Wasn't anything Mark had ever heard before. Part mechanical screech, part organic groan. A sound of pain that transcended language. The side of the craft suddenly split open. Not like a door opening, but more like a wound healing in reverse. A section of the metallic skin peeled back, revealing a complex interior that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. Two beings were visible inside. The first was clearly wounded, a humanoid figure with skin that seemed to shimmer between blue and silver, lying motionless on what looked like a biological medical platform. Mark recognized the form as feminine, though entirely alien. Her breathing was labored, and strange luminescent liquid, blood, perhaps, leaked from multiple wounds. The second being was trapped, a male counterpart, pinned by a massive structural beam that had partially crushed his lower body. He was awake, and his eyes, large, multifaceted like an insect's but with an unmistakable intelligence, locked directly onto Mark. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The trapped alien male began making sounds, complex, multi-layered vocalizations that seemed to carry multiple tones simultaneously. Mark couldn't understand a word, but the intent was clear. A mixture of desperation, threat, and a plea for help. Mark raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. A universal gesture of peace that he hoped might translate across species. "I'm here to help," he said softly, knowing the alien wouldn't understand his words, but might comprehend his tone. The medical training he had learned for human emergencies seemed woefully inadequate. The alien female's physiology was completely different. Her skin seemed to change color with each labored breath, revealing complex internal structures that looked more like circuitry than biological tissue. Mark's emergency kit contained basic supplies: antiseptic wipes, compression bandages, a portable oxygen tank, and some universal trauma supplies. He knew these would be useless against alien biology, but they were all he had. The trapped male alien continued his complex vocal communication. His body language was tense, protective of the female, wary of Mark, yet unable to do anything to help her or himself. Mark took one careful step forward. The alien male's communication shifted. Now the sounds carried a clear warning tone. "Stay back. Threat detected." But Mark had seen wounded creatures before. In his years as a forest ranger, he had helped injured animals, managed complex rescue situations in challenging wilderness conditions. This was different only in scale and origin, not in fundamental approach. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a small flashlight and a set of emergency medical scissors from his kit. The alien male's responses became more agitated, but Mark moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. First contact was happening, not through diplomatic channels or advanced technology, but through a simple human impulse to help a being in distress. Neither the human nor the aliens realized how much would change in the next few hours. The next hour was a testament to human resourcefulness. Mark knew he was dealing with an emergency far beyond anything in his medical training, but survival was survival, whether for a human or an alien. First, he assessed the situation. The alien female was critically wounded, with multiple complex injuries that seemed to affect her entire biological system. Her skin continued to change colors, revealing intricate internal structures that pulsed with an unknown energy. The male alien remained trapped, watching Mark's every move with a mixture of desperation and suspicion. Mark's ranger station was equipped for wilderness emergencies. He quickly realized he would need to improvise. The alien physiology was unlike anything he had ever seen, but the fundamental principles of emergency care remained the same. Stabilize, prevent further damage, and address the most critical injuries. He pulled out his emergency thermal blanket, a lightweight reflective material designed to prevent hypothermia. Carefully, he approached the wounded female, using slow, deliberate movements to show he meant no harm. The trapped male alien continued his complex vocal warnings, but Mark remained focused. The thermal blanket seemed to have an unexpected effect. As he draped it over the alien female, her skin began to stabilize, the rapid color changes slowing. Mark realized the blanket was doing more than just providing warmth. It was somehow interacting with her biological systems. Next, he examined her wounds. They weren't bleeding in the traditional sense, but a luminescent liquid continued to seep from multiple points. Mark's first aid kit contained a hemostatic gauze designed to stop severe bleeding. It was a long shot, but he applied it carefully to the most serious injury points. To his surprise, the gauze seemed to bond with the alien skin, creating a protective layer that slowed the liquid's flow. The trapped male alien's vocalizations changed. No longer purely defensive, they now carried a tone of curious observation. He was watching Mark's improvisational medical techniques with growing interest. Mark's next challenge was dealing with the structural beam pinning the male alien. Using a combination of a hydraulic jack from his emergency vehicle repair kit and some carefully placed wooden supports, he began to create a system to lift the beam safely. It was a slow, careful process. Every movement was calculated. Mark knew that one wrong move could cause further injury or collapse the already damaged spacecraft structure. The alien technology was far more complex than anything Mark had encountered. Parts of the spacecraft seemed to be healing themselves, with surfaces shifting and reforming. But the damage was extensive, and the healing process was incomplete. As he worked, Mark spoke softly, not expecting understanding, but providing the kind of calm reassurance he would give to any injured creature. "It's okay. I'm going to help you. Just stay calm." The female alien's breathing began to stabilize. Her skin had settled into a consistent silvery blue color, and the pulsing of her internal structures became more rhythmic. Mark wasn't sure if he was helping or if alien biology simply worked differently, but something was changing for the better. Hours passed. The forest around them remained silent, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. Mark continued his careful work, lifting the beam, applying emergency medical techniques, creating makeshift supports and stabilization methods. The male alien watched every movement. His initial hostility had transformed into something else, a mixture of confusion, respect, and growing understanding. As dawn began to break, casting soft light through the damaged spacecraft, Mark realized something profound was happening. He wasn't just performing a rescue. He was bridging an impossible gap between two entirely different species, and he had only just begun. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the damaged spacecraft, creating an ethereal glow that highlighted the strange landscape of twisted metal and organic technology. Mark sat exhausted but alert, watching the alien beings with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The female alien's condition had stabilized. Her breathing had become more regular, and the strange luminescent liquid that had been seeping from her wounds had almost completely stopped. The male alien, now partially freed from the structural beam, watched Mark with an intensity that went beyond mere observation. Communication was going to be challenging. Mark knew this wasn't like any rescue mission he had ever encountered. No standard protocol could prepare him for first contact with an alien species. He began by drawing simple pictures on a waterproof notepad he kept in his emergency kit. Crude stick figures, basic shapes representing the spacecraft, simple illustrations of what had happened. The male alien's multifaceted eyes tracked every movement of Mark's hand. Surprisingly, the alien seemed to understand the basic concept of visual communication. He began tracing something on a smooth, reflective surface near him, a technology that seemed to respond to touch like a living membrane. The markings were complex, intricate patterns that looked more like circuit diagrams than any language Mark had ever seen. Mark pointed to himself. "Mark," he said clearly. Then he pointed to the male alien, raising his eyebrows in a universal gesture of questioning. The alien's response was unexpected. A series of sounds emerged, complex, multi-layered vocalizations that seemed to carry multiple meanings simultaneously. One sound seemed to repeat, something that sounded like Krelna or Krellin. Mark repeated the sound, hoping he was approximating it correctly. The alien's body language changed, a subtle shift that suggested something between amusement and acknowledgement. Through a combination of drawings, gestures, and patient repetition, a basic form of communication began to emerge. Mark learned that the aliens were from a star system far beyond human understanding. Their mission involved some kind of diplomatic expedition, though the specifics remained unclear. The female alien began to show signs of consciousness. Her eyes, if they could be called eyes, were different from any human eyes. They seemed to shift and change, capturing light in ways that suggested she was perceiving the world entirely differently from humans. Mark shared his limited supplies, water from his canteen, some high-energy protein bars, anything he thought might help. The male alien, Krelna, watched each action with intense scrutiny. As the morning progressed, something remarkable happened. The alien's technology began to adapt. A small device near Krelna started to emit a soft humming sound, and suddenly Mark could understand fragments of the alien's communication more clearly. Not word for word, but in conceptual bursts of understanding. He learned that the spacecraft had been attacked. Something about a conflict between different alien factions. The female, who seemed to be of high importance, had been critically wounded during their escape. Krelna's perception of humans began to change. What had started as dismissive superiority was transforming into something closer to respect. Here was a primitive being from an apparently underdeveloped planet, using nothing more than basic survival skills and human ingenuity to save their lives. Mark didn't fully understand the significance of what was happening. He was simply doing what he had been trained to do, help those in need, regardless of their origin. As the morning light grew stronger, a new challenge approached. Something was coming. Something that posed a threat to the wounded aliens and their rescuer. The first contact was about to become much more complicated. The spacecraft's internal systems flickered like a dying heartbeat. Mark understood immediately that without some form of repair, the aliens would be completely vulnerable. What began as a rescue mission was rapidly becoming a complex technological challenge. Krelna watched intently as Mark surveyed the damaged vessel. The Ranger's eyes moved methodically, analyzing the alien technology with a practical wilderness survival mindset. Broken components, fractured energy conduits, damaged communication systems. To most, it would look like incomprehensible chaos. To Mark, it was just another problem waiting to be solved. He pulled out his toolkit, a collection of tools refined through years of maintaining equipment in remote forest stations. Multi-tools, wire cutters, electrical tape, spare copper wires, and a collection of adapters that had saved him during countless wilderness emergencies. The alien technology was fundamentally different, but some basic principles remained universal. Energy flow, structural integrity, connection points. Mark approached the damaged systems like a mechanic would approach a complex engine, breaking down the problem into manageable components. First, he identified the primary power distribution network. Using his flashlight, he traced the intricate pathways that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Some sections were completely destroyed, while others were merely disconnected. Krelna made occasional sounds, part warning, part instruction, but Mark's focus remained absolute. He discovered that the alien technology responded to certain electromagnetic frequencies. By carefully applying his radio's power adapter and using some copper wire from his emergency kit, Mark created a makeshift bridge between two critical system components. The result was unexpected. Entire sections of the spacecraft began to hum with renewed energy. Krelna's communication became more animated. The sounds were no longer just warnings, but seemed to carry genuine surprise and growing respect. Mark's approach was brilliantly simple. Where advanced alien technology required complex solutions, he applied basic engineering principles. A broken circuit became a problem of connection. A damaged energy conduit became a challenge of redirecting power. Each solution was elegant in its simplicity. He used electrical tape to insulate exposed energy pathways. Copper wire became a substitute for what seemed to be advanced conductive materials. His multi-tool, designed for wilderness equipment repair, found unexpected uses in alien technology restoration. The female alien, still recovering, watched Mark's work with what seemed like growing consciousness. Her skin continued to shift colors, but now the changes appeared more controlled, more purposeful. As hours passed, more of the spacecraft's systems came back online. Communication arrays flickered. Diagnostic systems began to pulse with renewed energy. What had seemed like a fatal crash was slowly being transformed by human ingenuity. Krellna's initial hostility had completely transformed. The alien was now actively assisting Mark, using gestures and occasional bursts of sound to guide his improvised repairs. It was a collaboration that defied all expectations, a primitive human and an advanced alien species working together with nothing more than basic problem-solving skills. Mark discovered that some of the spacecraft's technology responded to thermal variations. By carefully applying his emergency heating pad in specific locations, he could trigger self-repair mechanisms within the alien technology. It was like coaxing a wounded animal back to health, using nothing more than patience and understanding. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the damaged spacecraft, Mark realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a moment of first contact, of bridging incomprehensibly different technological and biological systems. The repairs were far from complete, but for the first time since the crash, there was real hope. Something was approaching in the distance, something that would test everything Mark had accomplished. And the real challenge was just beginning. The first warning came as a subtle vibration. Mark felt it before he heard anything. A low-frequency tremor that seemed to ripple through the forest floor and the damaged spacecraft simultaneously. Krellna's body language changed instantly, shifting from cautious collaboration to a state of high alert. Something was coming. Mark's ranger training kicked in automatically. Years of wilderness survival had taught him to read environmental changes. The birds had gone silent. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. He moved quickly, checking the perimeter while keeping one eye on the still recovering alien female. Krellna began making a series of complex sounds, part communication, part warning. The spacecraft's partially repaired systems began to pulse with an angry red light. Mark recognized the universal language of imminent threat. From the forest's edge, the first signs of danger appeared. Metallic shapes moved between the trees, not walking, not flying, but moving with a fluid precision that defied natural movement. They were hunting something, or someone. Mark realized these were not friendly visitors. He quickly assessed his limited resources. His service rifle seemed laughably inadequate against what was approaching. The spacecraft's defensive systems were only partially functional. The wounded alien female was still recovering. Their survival would depend entirely on improvisation. Krellna began interfacing with the spacecraft's remaining systems. Mark could see complex holographic displays flickering to life. Maps, tactical information, threat assessments. Most of it was incomprehensible, but the universal language of danger needed no translation. Mark's mind raced. He had faced dangerous situations in the wilderness before, confrontations with mountain lions, managing forest fires, rescue missions in extreme conditions. This was different, but the fundamental principles remained the same. Assess, adapt, survive. He began gathering materials. Fallen logs became potential barricades. His emergency flares could become improvised explosive devices. The copper wire from his earlier repairs could become makeshift electrical traps. The approaching entities were getting closer. They moved with a mechanical precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. Metallic constructs that seemed to shift and change, adapting to the forest terrain with impossible flexibility. Krellna's communication became more urgent. Mark didn't need a translation to understand. They were about to be attacked. The first wave came quickly. Mechanical probes that cut through the forest like liquid metal, moving with a hunter's precision. Mark's first line of defense was a series of electrical traps created from the spacecraft's damaged components and his own emergency equipment. The results were unexpected. The mechanical hunters triggered his improvised defenses, creating electrical surges that temporarily disrupted their systems. It was like watching a high-stakes version of the wilderness survival techniques he had used countless times. Krelna began contributing. The partially repaired spacecraft's systems came to life, creating energy barriers and interference fields. Human improvisation combined with alien technology created a defense neither side had anticipated. Mark used the forest itself as a weapon. Understanding the terrain better than the mechanical hunters, he created choke points, used natural cover, and turned the environment into a strategic advantage. One by one, the mechanical hunters were neutralized, not through superior firepower, but through a combination of human tactical thinking and alien technological assistance. As the last of the mechanical hunters fell, Mark realized something profound had happened. This wasn't just a survival scenario. This was a demonstration of what humans could do when pushed to their absolute limit. The forest grew quiet again, but they all knew this was just the beginning. Something much bigger was coming. The aftermath of the battle was unlike anything Mark had ever experienced. The forest floor, once pristine, now looked like a battlefield of alien technology and human improvisation. Fragments of mechanical hunters lay scattered between ancient pine trees, slowly dissolving into strange metallic dust. The alien spacecraft, still damaged but significantly restored, hummed with a renewed energy. The female alien, who Mark now understood was some kind of royal figure, had fully regained consciousness. Her eyes, complex and shifting, studied Mark with an intensity that went beyond simple observation. Krelna approached Mark, his movements now more fluid, less defensive. The translation device they had cobbled together from spacecraft components continued to improve, allowing fragments of communication to become clearer. "You are not what we expected," Krelna communicated, the words forming in Mark's mind more than being spoken aloud. Mark simply shrugged. He was a forest ranger who had done what any human would do, help those in need, regardless of their origin. The spacecraft's internal systems began a complex restoration process. What had once seemed like irreparable damage was now slowly healing, with Mark's improvised repairs serving as a foundation for more advanced reconstruction. It was a testament to the collaboration between human problem-solving and alien technology. Krelna shared fragments of their mission. They were diplomats from a complex galactic coalition, investigating potential emerging civilizations. Their crash was no accident. They had been pursued, targeted by a faction that saw potential emerging species as potential threats. Mark's rescue had changed everything. The female alien, whose name Mark learned was something close to Irialin, approached him. Her movement was now strong, confident. She carried with her a small device, unlike anything Mark had seen before. "For your people," she communicated, presenting the device to Mark. "Knowledge, not of weapons, of healing, of understanding." The device looked like a combination of a data chip and a living organism. It pulsed with an inner light, suggesting it was far more than a simple technological artifact. Mark understood this was more than a gift. It was a bridge between species. Krelna's final communication was profound. Humans were not seen as a primitive species to be conquered or ignored. They were potential partners, beings with an extraordinary capacity for adaptation, problem-solving, and compassion. As the spacecraft prepared for departure, Mark realized the true significance of what had happened. This wasn't just a rescue. This was first contact. This was humanity's introduction to a larger galactic community. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Ancient pine trees stood as silent witnesses to a moment that would change everything. The spacecraft began to rise, not with the violent energy of its initial crash, but with a smooth, almost gentle motion. Mark could see the repairs they had made together, his improvised solutions now integrated with advanced alien technology. Krelna made one final communication, an invitation, not just to Mark, but to humanity, a suggestion of future contact, of potential collaboration. As the spacecraft became a distant light in the morning sky, Mark Wilson stood alone in the forest. Everything had changed, and yet nothing looked different, except for the small device in his hand, a promise of something more. The first chapter of humanity's galactic story had just begun.